Welcome. My name is Joe Peprocki. I'm a national consultant at Loyola Press in Chicago, and I welcome you to this webinar, Values, Virtues, and Social Emotional Learning, a webinar on early childhood development. And I'm very happy to have two guests with us today who I'm going to be introducing in just a moment, Dr. Kathryn Bojczyk and Peggy Kulling. But I'd like to once again thank you for taking the time to join us today as we look at this very important topic of reaching our young ones, our early childhood children, with social emotional learning, also known as life skills or soft skills. We'll be talking about all of that in a moment. I invite you, now that you're here, or if you're just entering, to go into the chat and introduce yourself, tell us who you are and where you're from and what you're teaching. And that helps us to know our students a little bit better today. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available. I say that to the people who are here live. Sometimes people have to leave early and they start putting into the chat, I have to leave, is this going to be recorded? So yes, it is being recorded. The link will be sent to you as someone who registered. Feel free to use the chat throughout. If you have any questions as well, we will have a Q&A a little bit later on during this webinar with Kathryn and Peggy. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our guests for today. And so let me begin with Dr. Kathryn Bojczyk. Kathryn is the chair of the Department of Education and coordinator of the Early Childhood Education Program at the Catholic University of America. And she earned her PhD from Purdue University in developmental studies. She has over 20 years of experience teaching courses such as human growth and development, educational psychology, and early childhood curriculum, and instruction courses. And Kathryn is also an active catechist in her home parish in the Archdiocese of Washington. She has over 15 years of experience teaching catechism to students in pre-K through fourth grade. And so she targets the audience that we're talking about today. So Kathryn, good to see you. Thanks for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thanks for being here. And let me introduce your co-star, and then we'll jump into things. So Peggy Kulling is a managing editor for curricula development here at Loyola Press in Chicago. She began her career as a teacher and later moved into educational publishing, where she has worked for more than 30 years. Peggy's been a part of the new product development team for Loyola Press for the past 9 years, where she has managed a wide range of programs, including several that spotlight social emotional learning and education. Peggy, thanks for being here. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here with you and Kathryn and everybody, all the participants that are finding their way in.
Great. Well, thanks to both of you for being here once again, and thanks to all of our participants. So we're going to jump right in and put our two guests to work here. And I thought we would, first of all, define some of the terms that we're using in our title as we talk about social emotional learning and early childhood development. So Kathryn, I'd like to start with you. Can you give us an overview of who are we talking about when we refer to early childhood, and what are some of the characteristics of children in this age group?
Certainly. When we're talking about early childhood education, for this presentation, we're going to be focusing on pre-K to third grade, so ages 5 to 8. And what I really love about this age and why I love coordinating the early childhood program is that children, they're so curious, they're so exuberant, and they're so excited. So when I teach catechism to the pre-K, that's like, they always pick me, they want to raise their hand, they want to help you. They're just so excited. They don't always filter what they say. So we have to work on self-control and monitoring and waiting. A lot of times, again, they want to just jump in, always be first at something. So that's a skill that we like to work on, that it's a good thing to wait and to have patience.
It does take a real gift to work with early childhood. I know as a catechist myself, very often I would tell people I teach 8th grade, and the catechist would say, "Oh, I admire you for doing it. I just teach the preschool." And I'd be like, "You're the person I admire." I mean, it takes a special gift to be able to work with that age group because they have unique characteristics. So Peggy, what can you add about early childhood and why they are so unique?
Early childhood, a lot of the kids come from, all the children come from a home, different varying home backgrounds, and their behavior set of skills always reflect what they learn at home. My mom always used to say, you learn what you live. And the environments that children come to us as teachers in different ways often reflect their home environment and home training. And it is varied in the different ways that the children come prepared for school and dealing with persons outside of themselves and their immediate family. So it's an interesting time of transition. And a lot of gains are made over the course of the first few months when somebody first comes into a more formal educational setting.
You're absolutely right. I think about that with my own grandchildren as I see them, come over to my house, my wife and I, to grandma and grandpa's house, and they expect things to be exactly as they are at home, right? They have rules at home and they come in, and of course they expect it to be the same. And as a teacher, you may be laying down a different set of rules and expectations, and that's probably a little hard for them. I invite our participants to go into the chat and to add any other things that you would say help describe early childhood. What are some of those characteristics, unique characteristics of early childhood that makes them so different to teach than any other age group? As you do that, let's move on to defining the second part of our title. And we said that we use the term social emotional learning. And Kathryn, you're going to expand on that a little bit too, of what that means, but also some other terms that people use for what is known as SEL. So tell us about social emotional learning, Kathryn.
Social emotional learning, it's really a process. Children need to acquire many things to have social emotional learning. So for example, it's the process by which they develop healthy identities. They learn how to manage their emotions, like I was mentioning about self-control. Also, just thinking about how to achieve their own personal goals and then community goals. So we can think about how can we get them to take the perspective of others. And so that's why things like group projects with young children are really good, because it encourages them to build relationships, to show empathy for other people. And in some academic circles and professional circles, they prefer the term life skills or soft skills.
Okay.
Because again, it's the kind of skills that require you to think outside the box. It's not just about following rules or being obedient. It's really being kind and compassionate, and relationships are at the center of. If you think about many jobs, in the future, you really have to have good people skills. And so social emotional learning, or those soft skills, are the beginning of that. How to build friendships, how to be kind, how to wait and listen for someone else to take a turn.
Yeah, so in other words, it's not, teaching, like the content out of a book. It's teaching how do we all get along together in the setting. You're not alone here. You're with other kids the same age, right? So we're giving them the building blocks to learn how to live together and work together, right?
Right. It's also understanding different cultures. Again, as Peggy was mentioning, people come from different families. They live in different types of houses. And so part of social emotional learning is understanding, different children from different neighborhoods, different communities, and how can we all work together in the school setting or in other settings.
Yes, and Peggy, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what your understanding of social emotional learning is?
I would completely agree with Kathryn about it being a process and a always building the capacity to grow those skills that are so necessary, not just as we come together for what we call school or kindergarten readiness, but these are exactly the skills that will ready us for academic success, success in interpersonal relationships and work relationships. And actually, they are the underpinnings of success in academic areas as well. So it's not just how you treat somebody, although that is a huge part of it. It's knowledge of oneself and how we bring that understanding as learners and see ourselves as learners and continue in the process as we grow.
I would imagine too that it's very difficult for a early childhood teacher or parents of early childhood children, as we're trying to teach them these life skills. They don't always embrace them right away. And so we might, find ourselves getting very frustrated that, I only have so much time to make sure they have this foundation for life. Would you say that's a pretty common experience of some frustration over not being able to, really make sure that they have these skills that are so necessary?
Yes, especially with the pandemic. I know for friends of mine and teachers, it was something that, as early childhood classrooms were online and, kids, it's like, how do you do show and tell and other kinds of things and building confidence when, they would run away from the screen, or they would, one friend of mine said her daughter used to like hide under the desk and say, "Mommy, please, when am I going to be able to go back to school?" It was very different. And so just thinking about building those skills when you have this screen, like you're trying to interact, they want to, and of course with social distancing, like trying to keep away. Kids at this age, again, when I go into a classroom, it's like they want to come over and hug me right away. And it was just, one of those things is you had to keep your social distance and stay within your little hula hoop or the space that we had designated in the classroom once we did return. And so it really took some adjustments with the pandemic. So we're seeing with play right now, a lot of times where teachers are having to model these social emotional skills. How are you kind to one another? How do you approach a friend that you want to play together, because they were in this distance learning mode? So definitely it's something parents
Yes.
and teachers had to adjust to.
Yeah, and I would invite our participants to go into the chat and share any experiences or insights they have about some of the frustrations that perhaps you run into in working with early childhood as you're trying to impart these life skills to them. What are some of the things that you've encountered both during COVID and as we're coming, back more into teaching in person? And we're going to be pausing for Q&A later on, but it doesn't necessarily have to just be questions. We can also just pause and look at the chat and read some of the observations and experiences that some of our attendees have as well. But let's take this a bit further now. And I know in our preparation for this presentation, both Kathryn and Peggy, you were talking about the 5 facets of social emotional learning. And so we thought, well, this is seems to be kind of the bedrock of social emotional learning. And I'd like to ask Peggy to begin by introducing us to what are these 5 concepts in brief. Well, we're going to take them apart one by one after that. But tell us about them in brief, and where did they come from? Did you write them, or where are they from, Peggy?
So, social emotional learning, that even, let's just start with that terminology. It was popularized by CASEL, C-A-S-E-L, and that's the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. They have been in the business of helping people develop the social emotional skills and career readiness since the 90s. And the 5 facets you see here are derived from the 5 facets that were promulgated by CASEL some time ago. And you will see that as we talk about this a little more, that these are not mutually exclusive facets. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of working in one domain or facet within another. And that is purposeful. And that is how that is meant to work. You might see other facets discussed. Many states have developed their own facets for standards The last time I looked, preschool in just about every state has standards related to social emotional learning, but you will see that they pretty much have these consistent 5 domains: the self-respect and awareness, self-management, empathy and respect, social skills, and decision-making. You might see them phrased a little differently, but these are definitely the bedrock facets, and that are often the way we discuss social emotional learning or life skills.
Okay, fantastic. So let's take these apart one by one. Spend a little time on each one of them. So Kathryn, tell us about the facet of self-respect and awareness.
Well, one thing, again, that's great about early childhood is that children tend to have very high confidence at this age. And so like their self-efficacy is very high. Like if you ask them, how far can you throw this? Or how, high can you jump? They're going to tell you, like this much. And so that's one of the wonderful things, is that they are aware of they have this ideal view of themselves. And then sometimes, then when they're thinking about other peers, it's just trying to be aware of others' abilities. If they are really like reading, for example, they may assume that everybody likes reading. And so getting them to understand that everybody has different gifts, they have different skills, and being aware of what are their areas of strength and what are their areas maybe where they need to grow. But again, for the young child, usually it's just like, I can do anything, which again, in teaching, it's helpful to identify, what are those? We like to call them glows, areas of strength, and then grows. What are some areas for improvement? When I'm training teachers, I'm talking about, you're having conferences with parents, always remember you want to talk about the glows and the grows, like the areas where the child is excelling and they have high self-efficacy, and areas maybe where they have less confidence. And so that's what's really important in early childhood, is allowing them to understand that when they make mistakes, that's when their brain grows. And for parents, they want to just jump in. We saw this too in the pandemic, where we collected writing samples. I was observing a student teacher, and she said, Dr. Bojczyk, it's really interesting. These kindergartners, they're writing so well. And then I'm like, let me see, take a look. And I thought, I have a feeling the parents were helping that. And so the teachers had to say, parents, like, let the children, we want to see what they can write,
Sure.
not what you can write. And so again, being aware of that, and also self-respect, just being proud of their own abilities and respectful of other people around them. That's part of this self-respect and awareness.
I love what you said, Kathryn, about the notion of learning not only your strengths, but also your limitations. I mean, I honestly can remember at that age thinking that I was the fastest human being in the world. And then, getting together with other kids and challenging them to a race and finding out that I was nowhere near the top of that. In fact, I was just near the bottom. And so there's like you said, kind of being out of touch with reality, just having this thought that I can do anything, but then coming to learn, well, I can do this, but maybe I'm not so good at that. Peggy, were you about to add something to that?
I agree with both of you. And one of the things that grows out of this idea of self-awareness and respect, and the idea of I can do anything when it is channeled meaningfully, is the idea that the children persist and they grow in their ability for respectful self-advocacy. So when they're asked to do something like read this short piece or find a partner, they are able to talk about, I need a quiet place when I read. May I go to a quiet place in the reading nook to read? I have trouble picking a partner between 2 of my good friends. Can you help me pick a partner? So it's that type of self-advocacy that builds out of this awareness that not only helps people get along in a classroom setting, but when they get their first jobs or they are in very content specific classes, they can tell the instructor what they need to better learn the material. They can work with their boss to say, I love to tell the story of my neighbor who worked at Dairy Queen, and he was just having a terrible time. And they said, David, you're going to have to learn how to do that better, or we're going to have to ask you to go. And he said, I'm a visual learner. could you, instead of talking about it, can you show me a couple more times how to do it? And it's that self-advocacy that ends up taking something that could be a negative outcome and a negative feeling about ourselves to a more positive feeling.
I'm glad that you kind of put a label on that, because I'm recognizing that in my grandchildren, my 4-year-old granddaughter, is many things that when I will enter into her little world to play with her, and she'll say, no, I need it to be this way, or I want it to be this way. And so, she speaks up for herself. And so you're calling that self-advocacy. Great. Okay. Let's move on then. Peggy, as long as you had the floor last, why don't we let you keep going? Tell us about self-management.
So self-management, again, jumps off of what we were talking about. And it's having that understanding that when a frustration or a stressor comes up, to have some tools to deal with that, to recognize it, to name it, like we are able to name our emotions and say, I am feeling this way today. So-and-so has this look on his face. Perhaps I will go over to him and ask how he's feeling. So it again talks about the relationship between ourselves and others. And self-management isn't just self-discipline, but that's a big part of it. It's also having the courage to try new things. Self-management, a lot of times we, depending on the child, they aren't able to try something that they won't find immediately successful. So that's something that has to do with self-management. Identifying stress management, identifying the difference between an emotion and an action, and that we have control over our actions, but there are a wide range of emotions. And as adults, we do a lot to speak about what those emotions are, but children learn a lot about self-management as well as a lot of the social emotional cues from their the adults, the peers that they model their own behavior after.
You're making so many light bulbs go on for me. I hope for our attendees as well. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, boy, this sounds a lot like what I see when I'm with the grandkids and they're watching Daniel the tiger. He seems to be often showing them self-management. Like, when you feel angry, here's what you do. And then they sing a little song. They teach them how to do that. And I thought to myself, well, I could have used some of that when I was that age, because those really are skills that you learn. How, when you get angry, you can't just scream and shout, but you have to take a deep breath, and and so on. And so that's all the notion of self-management. Kathryn, you can add anything else to that, or move us into empathy and respect as the next facet for us to look at.
One thing I wanted to say about the management is a lot of times as teachers, we need to use tools to help children to deal with frustration, or maybe there's some that they can't sit still. And so you may have like a wobble chair, or they may have like a fidget toy or something like that. One time, a friend of mine, her daughter was having a meltdown in my driveway because we were about to go to the pumpkin patch, and her friend said she was going to carpool with her in her car, but then she decided no, she was going to go with her big sister. And so she started to just scream and her whole body was shaking. And she's like, I don't know what to do. So I ran in my house and I grabbed slime. And so I was like, I got her to work through it. And it was like within 2 minutes, she calmed down and she said, I can't believe it. That was a miracle. Like, who knew that? And so I just said she needed to calm down. And so by that cool texture, she couldn't put into words how frustrated she was. But by that tool, something very simple, she was able to calm down, and we were able to go to the pumpkin patch and, move on. And she's like, thank goodness, like you were around to help me through this. And so you've got to have your bag of tricks, your tools to help you. And so those sensory toys can be really great when kids are frustrated.
So we all need a little slime in our life. I love that. What a great tool to use with kids. Well, tell us about empathy and respect, Kathryn.
Well, speaking of empathy, so again, my daughter, when she observed this, she was like, hey, like, how come we all didn't get slime, And so I was trying, then I used it as a teachable moment to say about empathy as well. She was really think about how upset she was. And so this slime, really made her happy and it calmed her down. And so trying to understand. So empathy is about showing compassion for others, but then also being able to see it from their perspective. Like she was so frustrated she couldn't talk. And so wasn't that great that we could give her this, so although I just gave away, some of the slime from our house, but it was like, she was able to share that with somebody else and it helps. So being able to see, oh yes, like you didn't need the slime to calm down, but somebody else did. And so it's understanding, like, and then why? She's like, why did she get so upset? And I said, she was disappointed. She wanted to ride with her friend. And so, when we get disappointed, sometimes it's hard for us to manage. And so this is what came out for her. So that's part of empathy, is that, again, when you see things like that, if a child is having a temper tantrum in the classroom, it's a way, instead of the kids staring and shaming the child, it's helping to understand we've all had those moments, and to try to show what can we do to help that child? How can we calm them down? And how can we show concern for the feelings of others? So I think that's really important in early childhood classrooms.
Is some degree of empathy innate? In other words, when one child cries, sometimes other children just break into tears as well because they're feeling something. Can you say something about that? I'm just curious. Is there something?
Oh, that is a great question. There's been some research at Yale on that, looking at babies, where they've done some puppet shows for babies to see, do they understand, kindness and so forth. They think, what does a baby, know? And so they look longer at the puppets that are being kind, and they look away from the one that, so for example, if a puppet was struggling to open a box, the one that was kind and helped, they will look longer at that puppet. And the one that was mean, they will look away, almost as if they understand, like that was the good guy, so to speak. And so they have this innate sense of empathy. So where they understand the emotions. Like, again, one baby cries, they all cry. But also we do need adults to moderate that, because then with this research, they showed older children in that preschool age where they earned prizes or tokens. And so they would assign, like you can get the equal amount, like you get 3 and the other person gets 3, or, you get 4 and they get 1. And for some reason, they chose where they would get more than the other child. But then as the kids got older, closer to 7 and 8, it switched. They wanted to be more generous. And so that is, kind of showing that although there's this innate sense to want to be kind, that when there's that competitiveness that kicks in, like I've got to have more than everyone else. And that's why we really need to be fostering these skills from early childhood to say, isn't it better to have the fair, equal option instead of like more for me? And then when they get a little bit older, they're more generous. And so it's interesting, this juxtaposition of this research, that babies are so seemingly savvy, but yet you see children be selfish and maybe not make good choices. And so it really has to be fostered.
Those studies that you share, those are fascinating stories. I wish I could take your class and hear more about those. It's just amazing when you can watch children and study them, and then bring that to that research to help us understand and help other educators. That must be an exciting part of your job, I presume.
It is really fun, and the students love seeing those experiments. They just get
Sure.
excited.
Well, let's move on to the fourth facet, which is social skills. And Peggy, can you walk us through this?
That absolutely overlaps with empathy and respect. Again, early relationships set children's expectations for what relationships should be like. Children model their social interactions against the social interactions they see. So if they see children modeling, or even puppets modeling empathetic or kind behaviors, they are better able to exhibit those behaviors themselves, because the younger the child is, the more they learn by example and not being told, be nice to somebody. They like an example of how to be nice and to see it in action. And this would be the interactions that they would mimic or take upon themselves, would be the parent to child interactions, the child to peer that they see, and the peer to teacher. This social skills, just like we were talking about empathy and respect, there is a lot about seeing yourself in the other person, wondering why that is happening. As adults, we have to make certain that we are helping, like Kathryn mentioned, but also not shaming children to say, that's not how we act when we're disappointed. It's more to walk the child through why it is that somebody would act that way, not use a child as a non-example of how to behave. And what people will try to do as they get older, when that becomes that it is also valued by the adults, while it's also valued by the community, they will tend to exhibit those behaviors more frequently. Social skills also are a lot about communication. So we know that we have receptive language skills, and we have, which is active listening. One of the big things that when kids come to school, even if they know how to take turns in a discussion, they're taking turns means that they are just being quiet until it's their turn to talk again. They are not listening to what somebody else is saying. So a very important social skill that when developed early on in adding the capacity and the muscle around that is listening. It's a very important one. And then expressive communication skills. Can children say what they need? Can they describe a situation? Those are all part of social skills. And then a really large part of social skills is conflict resolution. Do people see everything as a conflict, or do they perhaps see it as an opportunity to share? Are there adults nearby who could intervene and make it an opportunity to learn about how do we act when somebody is spending more time at a learning center and we don't have, when we want to go there, or playing with a classroom toy or talking to a friend. So these are all part of social skills that we need to develop at the younger ages, and oftentimes they have to be retaught in different settings because the complexity of the interactions as the children grow require a more complex toolbox, so to speak, to deal with that resolution strategies.
It's amazing when I watch children at this age. I keep referring to my grandchildren. The drama that can can materialize in the conflicts that occur. And of course, it's at a very minimal level, but to them, it's very dramatic, and it can create some dramatic scenes with crying and screaming and so on. And so the social skills we're trying to help them how to avoid these situations, how to resolve the situations as well. Is that correct?
Kathryn, do you?
There is a great question that came up in the chat as well. It's saying, is there hope for adults who didn't develop these skills in childhood? So again, that's a fascinating question, because again, I see in working with college students, I'll see that students do vary in their skills. And so a lot of times when I'm teaching about these topics in class, and like, for example, we read an article about emotional intelligence, and I related it to the business world, because sometimes I'll have students from business, and so they're taking this class as an elective. And so I was mentioning these types of soft skills, and you could just tell some students, like, shaking their head. And so I definitely think that you can still learn these things in adulthood, but sometimes it's hard to break. And so I think with adults, it's really modeling and, kind of, again, pointing out when somebody's empathy or sharing has like a positive effect. It's kind of like catch them doing something right, so to speak. It's like highlighting that instead of shaming someone, like what Peggy was saying, we don't want to do that, but it's like pointing out when they are doing something really good, so that they can see, like, oh, I should really think about that. I need to work on that skill. And some of the breakout activities we do, small group work, tries to target this type of thing, because it's true. Not everyone, has that. It doesn't come naturally for everyone.
Yeah.
Great question.
And it would seem that more and more people, more and more of us are believing that you can teach an old dog new tricks, so to speak, that we can teach these skills to adults as well, because, look at the explosion of what we call life coaches and so on. And so but what we're saying for our purposes here is that the building blocks of these really need to come in early childhood. So perhaps you can wrap that part up, Kathryn, and then take us into decision making.
Yes, so decision making, children have to make a lot of, in their world, they have to make choices, right? So a lot of times we'll say like, is this a good choice or, a bad choice, so like in kind of getting them to think about the consequences of their actions, like, was that a good choice or what could we have done maybe that would have been, different? So for example, the siblings here, sibling arguments, or this is mine, and so then when it gets passed along to a younger sibling, they may think, so part of the social skills is learning how to make decisions and also so making choices. So we can think about in early learning centers, we give children opportunities to make choices, and we often will limit how many friends can be at this particular station because otherwise it gets, too big and too chaotic. And so it's kind of like making a decision, where am I going to spend my choice time? And then what do I do with the time that I have? Am I going to spend all my time at this center or am I going to rotate to another one? So that helps them to think about the consequences of their actions. And again, that and it depends on the philosophy. So in some school curriculum, may not matter if they spend all their time at one particular center, as long as they're learning, and others, we want the children to rotate. So it really depends on the philosophy of the program as well. But definitely giving kids opportunities to make choices helps with this decision making. And also knowing like what to do in classrooms too. We talk about what about when you feel like something isn't right or is it wrong? This little inner feeling that you have, and so being able to say, if I'm not sure if this is good or not, maybe I need to talk to a trusted adult or somebody to know, like, if for example, if someone asks them to steal something, like they know that's wrong, but they really want to, be liked by this friend. And so, but it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then you tell, a trusted adult, so you can work through that. So when that little voice inside your head tells you something and a friend wants you to do something else, you've got to make that decision. And so by teaching them those values and good life choices, hopefully they know, wait a minute, I have to stop. And at least if I feel like I can't handle this, I've got to get an adult or a teacher, a parent or teacher to help me with this.
Yeah, and Kathryn, I think you're setting the table for us to move into the next segment now that we've looked at these 5 facets that we want to cover. A couple of terms, and you just mentioned one of them is values. We're going to get to that in a second, but something closely related to that are virtues. So we have a couple of V words, so to speak. And it seems to me that, decision making is not made in a vacuum, of course, that it is based on something. And part of what these are based on are virtues, values, and so on. So Peggy, let me ask you to talk a little bit about this notion of virtues. What are virtues and how do they relate to these, the 5 facets that we just talked about and social emotional learning in general?
Virtues, I think, Joe, we could talk about and think of as actions or habits of mind that we have internalized because we have used and practiced them so often, and that we use them across situations. So we generalize this understanding or this virtue across a number of situations. We do it in our home, we do it when we meet new people, and we are able to exercise these virtues. Virtues take practice, just like anything else would take practice. Most people can't just come to a piano and play a beautiful piano concerto. It takes a lot of practice, and it is that development of virtues that we apply to a lot of the social emotional learning. Then the virtues that we develop, they become our life skills toolkits for interacting and navigating the world. It is not that we are necessarily born with or imbued with being a good listener, and a lot of times we give that kind of simple language to it, but it is something that has to be developed practiced and then carried out. One of a virtue that I think is very important now, but we almost act like it is a negative, is actually, it's the virtue of effort. We hear so often about something that is effortless. Everything should be effortless, requiring no effort at all. And so it almost gives children and ourselves the message that anything we have to work to do perhaps isn't worth doing. And that is unfortunate, because effort is the basis of a lot of the success that we have. We aren't always able to share as adults or kids that something is taking us effort, that we are sounding out a word for the third time that we should know by now, that we have to really think about and can't do addition in our head. It takes effort. And a lot of times we don't like to show people that that is effort filled. Because we are in a society that looks for effortless. But I think it's a very important message that what is worth doing is worth the effort of doing. And so with virtues, some of these old axioms that we maybe have been lost to us. If at first you don't succeed, try again. These are the type of things that are the basis or the foundations of some of the virtues that we develop.
That's a great example of a virtue, Peggy, this notion of effort. I'm going to ask Kathryn to share one in a second, but let me just interject that once again, we're getting some nice comments and questions in the chat. And if anyone has any questions, comments, experiences, or insights of your own that you'd like to interject there, please go ahead and put those in chat. In a few minutes, we're going to pause for a little Q&A, and we'll read some of those comments that are there. But Kathryn, can you give us another example of a virtue?
Yes, before I do that, I just want to add one more thing about effort related
Sure.
to parenting. Is that a lot of times parents want to remove obstacles for their children. And so when we're again, school is it's a partnership between home and school, is to say, again, let them try that homework on their own, or if they struggle with something, then let them try. Don't just complete it for them, so it's really part of that parent-school partnership, is just to remind them of that, is that's what goes into learning, is that growth mindset that I was talking about earlier. It's like they learn so much by their mistakes. If the parent is correcting everything, the teacher doesn't really get a chance to know what the child knows. And so that's the purpose of homework, is really to let them practice, or again, whatever the teacher wants to send home. It could be optional or whatever, but it's like if they're doing it for the child, then the teacher really can't see where they are strong and where they need to grow. So related to that is patience, teaching children patience, that they shouldn't give up. If something doesn't come easily to them, that they need to persist. And also a lot of activities you can do in the classroom. Like for science, we love to do things related to planting things. And so you'll have to plant the seed and then wait. And we'll try different types of soil, different types of sunlight, so they can see where to, measure the growth of the plants. And so they'll check it each day, and you'll see them like, oh, it looks like nothing's happened. But it's like, we have to be patient. We have to wait to see, and then when the plant does grow, they're really surprised and shocked, because they've been looking at it over time. And another example, a lot of times we'll like to cook things, so they'll have an activity where they do some, baking. And so we'll be waiting. We can, smell the food, but we have to wait for it to come out. And then we have to wait for it to cool before we frost the cake and everything like that. So those activities are very hands-on. Kids love them in early childhood, but it also teaches them something valuable, the patience. They have to wait for the plant to grow. They have to wait for that food item to cook and to cool off before they can just dive into it. So those are some great activities you can incorporate into classrooms or even at home.
And I would think for sure, patience is a virtue that all teachers and parents of early childhood children need, right? So it's good to instill that when we're young, because may need to call on that later on in life, depending on the position we get into. Related closely to virtues are values. And Kathryn, why don't you go ahead and take us into this notion of what values are and how they pertain to social emotional learning and life skills?
Sure. Well, a value, it's a belief, an idea. It's something that's very important to your family. It also reflects the role of culture. You know, certain cultures have certain values that they think are really important, and even schools, they can have certain values that if you look at the mission statement of the school, they'll have those on their website. It really gives us guideposts like how we're supposed to live. So what are some of the underlying values of the school, or what are some of the values at home that you really want to promote in your children? So one I can think of is gratitude, especially coming out of the pandemic. We really, in some ways, had to struggle with that, to think about. It seems like things were so bleak. We were separated from our family and our friends. We couldn't go to school, but it's like we had our health and we had other things. We had our home, and so gratitude. My research looks at gratitude and what parents and teachers do to cultivate gratitude. And it's very interesting. From my research, I learned that there's two different types of gratitude. There's instrumental gratitude that we're very familiar with. I'm sure our parents had us write thank you notes when you get a birthday gift or holiday gift, thanking people, writing out the note. So that's instrumental gratitude, or a favor is granted. So we thank someone for that. But then there's this other type of gratitude, humble gratitude. It's realizing everything that we have is a gift, that we're not entitled to it. And so what can we do to cultivate this culture of gratitude, to where we're kind to people, not because we're looking for some reward or whatever, reciprocity, but because it's the right thing to do, and because it just feels good to just do that, knowing that there's nothing in it for you necessarily, but it's just being so thankful for your health or your good fortune that you want to share that with other people and show it in a way where you're not just doing it to get attention or praise. So that's an important value to instill in
That's
children.
great, Kathryn. I really appreciate that distinction between the two different kinds of gratitude. That's something for all of us to think about and to dwell on. Peggy, can you add another example of a value?
Honesty, I think, is an important value. I think that it's very difficult to necessarily teach honesty, because we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings if we are overly honest or that type of thing. But I think a general idea that we're honest with ourselves, we're honest with others, and in that honesty, we're kind. Talking about gratitude, one of the things that's so interesting about what Kathryn said in Kathryn's research is that the idea that a value of gratitude is important, is it also recognizes we don't do anything only on our own, that there is always something or someone that we are grateful for the help, and to acknowledge not only that we are not alone, but that we do have help. Sometimes I think helps with people not feeling like they're alone, and it also makes them know that we're in it together. And it's to give that idea of gratitude is very is very welcome, and it's very interesting with what Kathryn said in her research.
Thanks for those great examples. We have about 10 minutes left before we sign off, so we will try to keep things brief in our next couple of segments here. And the last thing that we want to cover, by way of sort of a foundation for social emotional learning, is the notion of heroes, and how heroes play a large part of a child's life and can be a factor in social emotional learning. So Kathryn, take us into this notion of hero worship for this age group, and how this relates to social emotional learning.
Yeah, so heroes are the people that children really want to emulate. And so it could be, someone famous, but it also can be everyday people that have made an impact on their lives, that have taught them something important. Like I think about one of my, heroes was the principal of my elementary school, because she always just, I think that's why I went into teaching, is because she just really got to know all the students by name. I mean, we were not exactly a small school, but it's just like, it was just amazing. Like, how does she know this? You know, she greets us in the morning by name. And, you know, like when she handed out the report cards and everything, she would, you know, compliment us. But also I really loved writing. And so, you know, it's like, we had this performance where we had to share writing, and I just remember her, you know, getting her praise. That just was so meaningful, you know, like that we worked hard on these pieces and we recited them, and that, but again, that she acknowledged she found the joy in each one, even though some were more eloquent than others. She found a way to compliment everyone, and I thought, what a great gift, you know, what an inspiring principal. You know, like the principal is your pal, you know, PAL. So that was really true for me.
That's a great example. And how about you, Peggy? Can you recall a early childhood hero of your own?
I don't know that I thought of this person as a hero at the time because I was too young, but I think in retrospect, it was quite heroic. When I was young, I was the oldest in my family, and my mother had my brother, and I was kind of left on the wayside because the new baby needed the extra attention. And our neighbor who lived across the hall said, how about if Peggy comes and sits with me and helps me do what I'm doing for this afternoon? And so she was very heroically, in retrospect, she was stepping in to give me the one-on-one attention from the adult that I had been used to, but also was kind of giving my mom a little break by saying, you know, two is more than twice one. And I just think the idea of community, of just sitting there and having her to myself in a way, to talk about things, for her to listen to me, for me to listen to her, that was quite heroic. And I often think about how I can see people, and I see that Mrs. H is the one that brought this to me, that see a mom say, you're doing a good job, you know, like, just don't ask necessarily what people need, but kind of give them what they need. So that is an early idea of a hero for me.
Those are both great examples. I'm sure they've got the rest of us thinking about our own heroes from that time of our life. But it's time for us to start wrapping up here. And I'd like, you know, teachers especially want something concrete they can move forward with. And so I've asked Kathryn and Peggy to each share 5 ideas, and we'll need to ask you to go through them rather quickly because of our time. But Peggy, let's start with you. Can you share what are some strategies that you would like to offer for incorporating social emotional learning, life skills into early childhood education?
Thanks, Joe. One of the things that you can do is post classroom rules where everybody could see it. You might need to have them be more visual than text-based early on, but I think that it helps reinforce in another way what the rules are, and make it just not another poster in the room, but something that is action and that people can refer to when they don't quite know what to do. Assigning classroom jobs gives children a sense of purpose. It gives them a sense of self-worth. It helps them know what their role is in the classroom. So assigning class jobs, which has been extremely difficult during COVID, because you don't have the weather person of the day or the attendance taker of the day. But if you reinstate that, it is often where children within a job will find more of their own self-efficacy. Provide options for choice, like Kathryn said. It's not 10 choices, it's 2 choices. So children can exercise that choice-making muscle, and they can say, if I choose this, then I will be able to do that. If I choose this, I won't be able to do that. So provide options. Facilitate group work. It helps with children knowing about sharing, about taking turns. And it also is better than hearing things just from one person all the time. They hear from each other, they hear from a peer. And then also, as Kathryn mentioned, catch children exercising life skills. And how do you do that? You can also chronicle that. You can have many preschool and K teachers walk around with a checklist or a catching kids doing the different life skills, and you can keep that as an assessment. You can take on a clipboard. I remember that you did this on this day. You stood in line, you were patient, you shared, you listened. Those are all opportunities to catch children doing things well. You can also catch them in action. Children love to see pictures of themselves and themselves with friends. You can also catch them exercising life skills by taking a snapshot that you, with a digital camera, that you can share with their parents and keep in a portfolio as an artifact for kind of a receipt that on this day, that individual child was exercising a life skill that we want to call attention to.
Great suggestions, Peggy, but wait, there's more. Kathryn, you've got some suggestions as well.
Really, when I do read alouds, I try to draw attention to the characters, the emotions, and ask the children, like, what is the character thinking? And how do you know that? So they're picking up on their, the context clues from the book and so forth. And with the puppets, a lot of times, like if you're trying to talk about a difficult topic, it could be, the puppet. So that way, if the child can project into the puppet, instead of like saying their own feelings, they're using the puppet as a tool. Early childhood, we love to use tools. Storyboards, this is a way, like if you're doing a read aloud and you're putting story pieces up, it's a visual for them to see. Also turn taking, like they have to wait for their turn to come up for that element of the story. They're putting it up on the storyboard. In dramatic play, you can incorporate various visuals that you can use. And then what Peggy was saying about catching them doing something right in your classroom management strategy, you might have like a marble jar. If they're doing something kind, they get to put a marble in there. And so when it fills up with a certain number of marbles, they can trade it in for a class popcorn party or wear crazy socks to school or whatever motivator you as a class can decide what that incentive is. And then they work towards that reward, which is more about that patience. They have to wait for that marble jar to fill up.
Well, that's awesome that the two of you gave us 10 practical strategies that we can come away with. I'm going to jump ahead to go to our Q&A, and I want to look at the comments and chat. And as I mentioned, there was a few things I wanted to mention. So Krista mentioned being a previous clinician in child adolescent psych. In appropriate situations, it can help when an adult or teacher points out when they witness a child using self-management skills at a specific moment and explaining the positive behavior to the other kids as a way of modeling. This sounds kind of like what you were saying about the catch someone doing something good. Is that right?
Yes. And to point that out and to point out the effect that it had. So again, one time we had a child, she wasn't very good at sharing, and there was this little boy that was on the spectrum for autism, and he really wanted to be on the swing, and she let him, and then he actually let her push him on the swing for a little bit. And she was like, she told her mom, she was like, I pushed somebody on the swing today. And the mom was kind of floored, like, wow, like she never wants to share, anything, but it like seeing like how happy that made him. And so both parents were really happy about that encounter. So again, it's like reporting that, catching them doing something good and like, look at that. So then it encouraged her to want to be sharing again because she saw how happy it made that little boy.
Excellent. Peggy, anything else that you'd like to add as a final thought?
Yes, catching, that is something important, but it also is interesting when the kids start catching each other doing something good. And they say, I saw Sarah sharing, I saw her helping Michael. And it's nice that not only the adult can recognize and catch the kids doing something good, but it's nice when the kids are empowered and they start recognizing in themselves and others when they are using the different skills.
Thank you, Krista, for leaving that comment for us. And I'm just checking. I think something else just popped up in the chat. Oh, it was just some affirmation for you. It says,
right. Chris is affirming him.
Way to go. Excellent. Well, we thank everyone for, Gary's asking, can you recommend some books about this subject? Well, Gary, you're a mind reader. We actually have few things that we're going to share right now, and I'm going to turn it over to Peggy to share a couple of resources that are available for folks.
So as Kathryn mentioned, books and read alouds are such an important tool for teaching social emotional learning. And they're one of the best ways that has really been invented for us to see what is otherwise invisible. It's other people's thinking. So one series that is particularly good about this, and these are very easily shared books and they really work well to the read along, and they have 4 books in the series: Prudence, Listening, Effort, and Patience. And as you move through these, there are different vignettes where the children, adults are using everyday situations that require this particular virtue. They really allow for a lot of discussion. And with read alouds, when you're in a group, it's social emotional learning is even part of the way that we read aloud to children, because they have to come together. They can't infringe on other people's space. They have to patiently go through it. And the Virtue series is a really nice way to do it. The images are beautiful. And the other thing that is really nice about this Virtue series is it has companion activities. So it's direct instruction of how to build these virtues in conjunction with building social emotional learning skills. So there are 4 books in this series.
I'm going to point out before we move on to the next resource that you see a QR code on the screen. Obviously, you can pull your phone out and turn it to camera and hover over that and scan, and it'll take you right to where you can find that resource. Each of the resources that Peggy is pointing out are from Loyola Press, and on the last slide, I will share our website and phone number as well. So let's move on to the next one. I just wanted to leave that QR code up there for a second so people had a chance to scan that if they had hoped. But tell us next about a whole bunch of values.
A whole bunch of values is indeed just that. There are 47 different values that are discussed, defined, and there are beautiful images that help with discussion. And what I really like about this for the earlier ages is that these 46 values are discussed in alphabetical order. So it's kind of a nice way to, sometimes people think it's difficult to merge the social emotional learning skills with the regular content area skills. But it's kind of fun for when you look at this book many times, which kids will want to do, to say, can we think of a value that begins with S? And can we think of a value that begins with L? And it's a way for the children to organize their thoughts and be able to talk about those values. So this is another opportunity or another book where we also have companion pieces where there are activities that can be done around the values that focus directly on the 5 facets of the social emotional learning. So you have a book that you'll want to look at again and again, but you also have direct instruction that you can access for that.
Wonderful. And I'd like to thank my friend and colleague Ray, who put in the chat a link to the resources that we're talking about. Just one more way that you can find these resources. And then finally, we have one more resource for you to tell us about, Peggy, 10 Hidden Heroes.
10 Hidden Heroes by Mark K. Shriver. It's a wonderful resource, not only for pre-K, but also for to discuss the heroes among us. These, we see this little girl with a cape. She's in all of the vignettes, but there are people going about their lives in ways that are heroic. This is another opportunity to connect social emotional learning to some very beginning skills, such as counting and numeracy, because you count the number of people you see that are heroes in the different vignettes. You are, it is it's a larger book, so it really works really well for circle time and for that. And it also, I have found that it is a different conversation every time you get into it. So you pick a different group to read it aloud to. They will see different people doing different things as heroic. They will see themselves. It allows opportunities, just like all the other books that we talked about, to say, what do you think that person was thinking when that person helped them? What do you feel like when somebody helps you? How do you feel when you help somebody else? To get the idea that as we grow, there are some times when we need help, and there's sometimes when we give help. This is another wonderful book that we have, direct instruction companion that draws and gives really specific questioning to use when you read this book, and how you can elicit children's thinking around social emotional learning.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Peggy, for sharing those resources. Once again, the links are found in the chat. And here is the other way that you can find those resources at store.loyolapress.com. Our phone number is 800-621-1008. And I can't thank our guests enough, Dr. Kathryn Bojczyk and Peggy Kulling. They were kind enough also to leave their contact information on the screen. If you'd like to contact Dr. Bojczyk or Peggy Kulling, their emails are there. So thank you to Peggy and to Kathryn for sharing your time with us. Thanks to all of you who participated in this webinar, and we hope that we have given you some practical skills for bringing social emotional learning, life skills, soft skills into the lives of early childhood children. So thank you once again, and best wishes in your teaching and your parenting. Until next time, this is Joe Peprocki. Take care.